Hey everyone, I'm here to help you relax and drift off tonight. If you enjoy using these videos to fall asleep, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more calming content. Share where you're watching from and what time it is for you. I'd love to know. Now settle into a cozy spot, take a deep breath, and let's start unwinding together. In the small fog-drenched town of Ravenwood, there was an antique shop known as the Timeless Attic, tucked away in an unassuming alley. Its shelves were crowded with relics of forgotten eras, aged paintings, cracked porcelain dolls, tarnished silverware, and books whose spines seemed to whisper stories of their own. Among these items lay an unremarkable-looking journal. Bound in dark leather, its cover bore no title or embellishment, save for a faint symbol etched into the corner, a circle surrounded by jagged lines like a sun caught in shadow. The shop's owner, Mr. Hargrove, never remembered acquiring it, but it remained in the same spot for years, untouched and gathering dust, until the day Evelyn Carter walked into the shop. Evelyn was a college student and aspiring writer who had a fascination for old books and journals. She often wandered into antique shops in search of inspiration, hoping to stumble upon a relic with a story to tell. When she saw the journal in the Timeless Attic, something about it drew her in. The leather felt unnaturally warm under her fingertips, and as she opened it, she noticed its pages were blank but pristine, too clean for something so old. She asked Mr. Hargrove about it. "Strange thing, that journal," he said, frowning. "I don't remember putting it on the shelf, and no one's ever bought it. If you want it, take it for free. It's unsettling, if you ask me." Evelyn, intrigued, accepted the gift and brought the journal home. That evening, Evelyn sat at her desk, lit by the soft glow of her desk lamp. She opened the journal, pen in hand, ready to jot down her thoughts. But before she could write a word, something strange happened. Words began to appear on the page, as if an invisible hand were guiding them. The ink glistened for a moment before drying, leaving behind a chilling sentence. "Tomorrow you will lose something precious." Evelyn stared at the words, her heart racing. She touched the page, half expecting the ink to smudge, but it was permanent. "That's weird," she muttered, trying to shake off the unease. She closed the journal and went to bed, convinced it was some kind of prank. But the next day, while walking to class, Evelyn's necklace, a family heirloom passed down from her late grandmother, slipped off her neck and disappeared. She searched frantically but couldn't find it. When she returned home, she opened the journal. Another sentence had appeared beneath the first. "This is just the beginning." Evelyn couldn't explain the journal's eerie messages, but she couldn't bring herself to discard it either. Over the next few days, the journal continued to write on its own, predicting terrifying events with chilling accuracy. "A shadow will follow you." That night, Evelyn noticed a dark figure standing under a street lamp as she walked home. When she turned back to look again, it was gone. "You will bleed." The following day, she accidentally cut her palm on a broken glass while washing dishes. "Someone you trust will betray you." A close friend revealed a secret Evelyn had confided in, leaving her heartbroken. No matter how hard she tried to avoid the predictions, they always came true. Haunted and sleep-deprived, Evelyn turned to the internet to research the journal's strange symbol. After hours of digging, she stumbled upon an obscure forum discussing cursed artifacts. One thread mentioned a journal of the shadowed sun that wrote its owner's fate. According to the legend, the journal was cursed by an ancient scribe who had been wrongfully executed for treason. Before his death, he poured his anguish and hatred into the journal, vowing that anyone who used it would suffer as he had. The journal, it was said, didn't merely predict the future, it shaped it, drawing its owner into a spiral of fear and despair. Evelyn's hands trembled as she read the final warning on the forum. "Destroying the journal will only accelerate the curse. The only way to escape it is to confront the scribe's spirit and undo the curse at its source." The next morning, Evelyn woke to find a new message in the journal. "Tonight you will die." Her blood ran cold. The handwriting seemed darker, angrier, as if the journal itself were taunting her. She couldn't ignore the curse any longer. Determined to break the curse, Evelyn followed the clues she had gathered from the forum. She learned that the scribe's spirit was tied to the place where he had died, a forgotten prison ruin deep in the woods outside Ravenwood. Under the cover of night, Evelyn ventured into the forest with the journal in her bag and a flashlight in hand. The woods were eerily silent, the trees looming like specters in the darkness. When she reached the ruins, she felt an unnatural chill. The air grew heavy, and her flashlight flickered. In the center of the crumbling structure, a shadowy figure materialized, its form tall and gaunt, with hollow eyes that burned like embers. "You have my journal," the figure said, its voice echoing like a distant scream. "Why do you seek me?" "I want to break the curse," Evelyn said, her voice shaking. "Why are you doing this?" The scribe's gaze bore into her. "I was betrayed, condemned for crimes I did not commit. My anguish demands justice. Those who possess my journal must know the pain of inevitability." "There must be another way," Evelyn pleaded. The scribe hesitated, then pointed to the journal. "Prove your resolve. Write your fate in its pages. If your will is stronger than mine, the curse will break. If not, you will become its next victim." Evelyn opened the journal, her hands trembling. The blank page seemed to mock her, its emptiness filled with potential doom. She thought of the life she wanted, the dreams she had yet to achieve, and began to write. "I will live. I will break this curse. I will free myself and others from its grasp." As she finished the sentence, the journal began to shake violently. The scribe screamed, his form twisting and writhing as if consumed by invisible flames. The journal's pages ignited, burning with an unnatural light, and Evelyn threw it to the ground. When the fire died, the scribe was gone, and the ruins fell silent. Evelyn emerged from the woods at dawn, the cursed journal reduced to ashes. The weight that had burdened her for weeks was gone, replaced by a fragile sense of hope. In the days that followed, she noticed a profound change. The shadows no longer lingered, and the world felt brighter. She began writing again, not in cursed journals, but in her own notebooks, crafting stories that celebrated resilience and courage. The legend of the cursed journal faded into obscurity, but Evelyn never forgot the lesson it had taught her. The future is not set in stone, and even in the face of darkness, the human spirit can prevail. In the quaint and quiet town of Willow's End, nestled at the edge of a sprawling forest, there lived an 8-year-old girl named Lila Marlowe. Lila was a peculiar child, sweet-natured, with a vivid imagination that often left adults amused and slightly unnerved. She spent most of her time alone, wandering through the woods or playing in her room. Her parents, Margaret and Charles, chalked up her solitude to her being an only child. But Lila never seemed lonely. She would talk, laugh, and even argue with people who weren't there. "Imaginary friends," Margaret would say with a dismissive wave, though sometimes, late at night, she'd catch herself shivering at the sound of her daughter's hushed conversations. "Who are you talking to, sweetheart?" Margaret would ask. "Just my friends," Lila would reply, her eyes wide with innocence. But these weren't ordinary imaginary friends. Lila's first friend appeared when she was 6. She was playing in the woods behind their house when she stumbled upon a clearing surrounded by ancient, gnarled oaks. In the center stood a crumbling stone well, its edges mossy and damp. Lila felt an inexplicable pull toward it, as though the well were calling her name. "Hello?" she whispered, peering into the dark abyss. "Hello, Lila," a voice answered, soft and melodic. Startled, Lila jumped back. A boy, no older than herself, stood on the opposite side of the well. He had pale skin, dark, sunken eyes, and clothes that looked old-fashioned, like something from a sepia-toned photograph. "My name is Thomas," he said with a crooked smile. "Can I be your friend?" From that day on, Thomas was always with her. Soon others joined him. Emily, a shy girl with long, tangled hair, and Jacob, a sullen boy who rarely spoke. Lila thought of them as her secret companions, but they weren't like other imaginary friends. They had rules. Thomas explained them to her one afternoon as they sat beneath the oaks. "Never tell anyone about us," he said, his tone unusually stern. "Why not?" Lila asked. "They wouldn't understand," Thomas replied, glancing toward the woods. "And if they find out, bad things happen." Lila didn't question him further. She liked her friends, even if they were a little strange. They played games, told her stories, and kept her company when she was scared or sad. But sometimes their games turned unsettling. One evening, Thomas suggested they play hide and seek. Lila agreed eagerly, running to find the perfect hiding spot in the forest. She crouched behind a fallen log, holding her breath as the eerie twilight deepened around her. Minutes passed, then an hour. "Thomas," she called, stepping out from her hiding place. The forest was silent, save for the rustling of leaves. Suddenly, Emily appeared, her face pale and her eyes wide with fear. "You shouldn't have called his name," she whispered. Before Lila could respond, she felt something cold brush against her shoulder. She turned sharply, but nothing was there. That night, she heard scratching at her window, even though her room was on the second floor. Margaret began to notice strange changes in her daughter. Lila became more secretive, more withdrawn. She often spoke in hushed tones to empty corners of the room. Her once cheerful drawings turned darker, crude sketches of shadowy figures, the old well, and faces twisted in anger. One day, Margaret found a picture that sent chills down her spine. A family of stick figures standing in front of a burning house. Above them loomed a dark figure with glowing eyes. "Lila, what is this?" she asked, holding up the drawing. "It's just a story Thomas told me," Lila replied, unbothered. Margaret decided it was time to intervene. Margaret and Charles took Lila to see Dr. Helena Greaves, a child psychologist who specialized in dealing with children's imaginary friends. Dr. Greaves encouraged Lila to talk about Thomas, Emily, and Jacob. "They're my best friends," Lila said simply. "They're always with me." "And what do they tell you, Lila?" Dr. Greaves asked. "They tell me about the bad people, the ones who hurt them." Dr. Greaves leaned forward. "What do you mean, hurt them?" Lila hesitated, then whispered, "They used to live here, but bad things happened. Now they're angry." Margaret began researching the history of their property, digging through old town records and archives. What she found left her horrified. A century earlier, a family had lived on the land. A father, mother, and their 3 children, Thomas, Emily, and Jacob. The father, driven mad by jealousy, had set their house on fire, killing everyone inside before taking his own life. Their deaths had been ruled a tragedy, but rumors persisted that the children's spirits lingered, seeking vengeance on anyone who disturbed their home. Margaret realized with growing dread that the well in the woods must have been part of the family's property. That night, Margaret confronted Lila. "You need to stop talking to them," she said. "They're not your friends." Lila's eyes filled with tears. "But they'll be mad. They don't like it when people try to keep us apart." Before Margaret could respond, the lights in the house flickered. A cold wind swept through the room, even though the windows were closed. "You shouldn't have told her," a voice hissed. It was Thomas, though his tone was no longer soft or kind. Shadows gathered in the corners, growing darker and denser until they formed 3 figures: Thomas, Emily, and Jacob. "We warned you," Thomas said, his face contorted with rage. Margaret grabbed Lila and ran upstairs, barricading them in her bedroom. The walls trembled as the ghost pounded against the door. "You can't keep us out," Thomas shouted. Desperate, Margaret remembered something from her research, a story about appeasing, vengeful spirits. She rummaged through her desk, finding an old family Bible that had belonged to her grandmother. "Leave us alone," she shouted, holding up the Bible. "In the name of God, I command you to go." The spirits screamed, their forms flickering like dying flames. The room grew unbearably cold before the shadows finally dissipated, leaving behind an eerie silence. The Marlowes moved out of the house within a week, leaving Willow's End and its haunted history behind. Lila's friends never appeared again, though she sometimes felt their presence in her dreams, watching from the edges of her mind. Margaret never told Lila the full truth about Thomas, Emily, and Jacob. Some things she decided were better left unsaid, but she couldn't shake the feeling that the spirits weren't truly gone, just waiting for the next child to wander too close to the old well. And in the quiet of the forest, beneath the gnarled oaks, the whispers began anew. In the sleepy town of Hollowbrook, nestled deep within the Appalachian Mountains, stories of the ghost child had circulated for generations. Parents warned their children not to wander too far into the woods at dusk, lest they encounter the pale, giggling figure of a little boy who would lead them somewhere they could never return from. Most dismissed the tales as folklore, a way to keep children from getting lost in the dense, labyrinthine forest. But the townsfolk knew there was truth behind the legend. The ghostly child wasn't just a cautionary tale, it was a warning born of tragedy and mystery. The story began nearly a century ago with a boy named Eli Morgan, a cheerful and curious 8-year-old who loved to play by Hollowbrook, the winding stream that gave the town its name. One fateful autumn afternoon, Eli didn't come home. A search party combed the woods for days, calling his name and scouring every corner of the forest. They found his red scarf snagged on a branch near the brook, but Eli was never seen again. Heartbroken and desperate, his mother, Abigail Morgan, refused to leave the area where her son had vanished. Some say she called out to the spirits of the forest, begging them to return her boy. Others claim she made a darker pact. Whatever the truth, strange things began to happen in Hollowbrook soon after her death. Children wandering too far from home would vanish without a trace, their laughter echoing through the woods long after they were gone. Those who were found spoke of a pale boy with bright eyes who invited them to come and play. By the time the Bradley family moved to Hollowbrook in the early 2000s, the ghost child had become a whisper among the town's elders. The Bradleys, Claire, her husband Greg, and their 7-year-old daughter Maddie, were drawn to the town's quiet charm and the promise of a fresh start. Maddie was an adventurous and imaginative child. She loved exploring their new backyard, which bordered the dense forest. Her parents warned her not to go too far, but Maddie couldn't resist the call of the woods. One evening, just as the sun dipped below the horizon, Maddie came running into the house, her cheeks flushed with excitement. "Mommy, Daddy, I made a new friend," she exclaimed. Claire smiled. "Oh? Who is it?" "He's a little boy named Eli. He's really nice. He said he lives in the forest." Greg exchanged a concerned look with Claire. "Honey, you know it's not safe to talk to strangers, especially in the woods." "But he's not a stranger," Maddie insisted. "He said he's been waiting for me." Over the next few days, Maddie spent more and more time in the woods. She often came back humming unfamiliar melodies or talking about the games she and Eli had played. "He showed me a secret place," Maddie said one evening at dinner. "There's a big tree with a hole in it, and if you crawl inside, you can see his world." Claire's fork clattered against her plate. "His world?" Maddie nodded, her eyes wide. "It's so pretty, Mommy. He said I can stay there if I want to." Greg tried to laugh it off, but Claire couldn't shake the unease growing in her chest. That night, she searched online for stories about the forest and found countless accounts of disappearances linked to a ghostly child. The next morning, Claire visited Mrs. Abernathy, the oldest resident of Hollowbrook and the unofficial keeper of its legends. "The ghost child," Mrs. Abernathy said, her voice a low whisper. "It's Eli Morgan. Poor boy drowned in Hollowbrook all those years ago. They say he lures children to join him in the spirit world. Once they go, they're lost forever." Claire's hands trembled. "Is there a way to stop him?" Mrs. Abernathy hesitated. "Some say his spirit is tied to the place where he died. If you can find it, maybe you can put him to rest. But be warned, Eli doesn't let go of his playmates easily." That afternoon, Claire and Greg confronted Maddie. "We need you to show us where Eli lives," Claire said. Maddie looked uneasy. "I can't. He said grown-ups aren't allowed." Ignoring her protests, Claire and Greg followed Maddie into the woods. As they ventured deeper, the air grew colder, and the forest seemed unnaturally still. Finally, they reached the spot Maddie had described, a massive oak tree with a hollow at its base. Maddie hesitated, glancing around nervously. "Eli doesn't like this," she whispered. "Stay here," Greg said, crouching to peer into the hollow. Inside, he found a small bundle of items, a child's shoe, a rusted toy car, and a damp red scarf. The sight sent shivers down his spine. As Greg pulled the scarf from the hollow, a chilling laugh echoed through the trees. Maddie screamed, pointing at the shadows. Eli emerged, his pale face twisted with fury. "You're ruining everything," he shouted, his voice reverberating like a gale. Claire stepped forward, clutching the scarf. "Eli, this is yours, isn't it? It's time for you to rest." Eli's expression shifted from anger to sorrow. "I don't want to be alone," he whispered. "You're not alone," Claire said softly. "Your family's waiting for you." For a moment, Eli seemed to waver, his form flickering like a candle in the wind. Then he turned and walked toward the brook, disappearing into the mist. The forest felt lighter. The oppressive weight lifted. Maddie stopped talking about Eli, and no more children went missing in Hollowbrook. But the Bradleys couldn't shake the memory of that night. Sometimes, while walking near the brook, Claire thought she heard faint laughter carried on the breeze. And deep within the woods, the hollow tree remained, a silent reminder of the ghostly child who once lured others into his lonely world. In the quiet suburb of Brookhaven, nestled between rows of cookie-cutter houses, the Carter family lived a seemingly perfect life. Martha and David Carter were loving parents to their only child, 7-year-old Emily, a bright and imaginative girl with a talent for drawing. Emily spent hours with her crayons, her small hands furiously sketching whatever popped into her mind. She would cover sheets of paper with colorful depictions of animals, people, and places she had only seen in her dreams. Her parents proudly displayed her work on the fridge and in frames around the house. But everything changed the day Emily drew the Red Man. It began on an ordinary Saturday. Emily sat at the kitchen table, crayons scattered around her as Martha prepared breakfast. "What are you drawing, sweetheart?" Martha asked, glancing over her shoulder. "A friend," Emily replied, her tone unusually flat. Martha leaned closer and felt a chill run down her spine. The figure Emily had drawn was unsettling, a tall, lanky man with long arms, jagged fingers, and a featureless face. His body was entirely red, save for 2 black dots where eyes should have been. "He's scary," Martha said with a nervous laugh. Emily frowned. "He's not scary to me. He's nice." That night, Martha showed the drawing to David. "It's just her imagination," he said, shrugging it off. "Kids draw weird things all the time." But Martha couldn't shake her unease. A few nights later, strange things began to happen. Emily woke up screaming, claiming that the Red Man had visited her room. "He was standing in the corner," she sobbed, pointing toward the shadows near her closet. "He said he's watching me." David checked the closet, under the bed, in every corner of her room. There was nothing there. "It was just a bad dream," he assured her, tucking her back into bed. But the next morning, Emily's drawing of the Red Man was no longer on the kitchen table. Instead, it was pinned to her bedroom wall, the crayon lines smeared as though something had brushed against them. As days turned into weeks, Emily's drawings grew more bizarre and more menacing. She drew dark forests filled with glowing eyes, monstrous animals with gaping jaws, and shadowy figures lurking in corners. One evening, while Martha was folding laundry, she heard faint growling coming from the living room. She rushed in to find Emily staring at one of her drawings, a snarling wolf with glowing red eyes. "What's wrong?" Martha asked, her heart racing. "He's mad," Emily whispered. "I didn't color his teeth right." Before Martha could respond, the paper on which the wolf was drawn began to tremble. Slowly and possibly, the wolf's head emerged from the page, its eyes glowing like embers. Martha grabbed Emily and fled, slamming the door behind her as the growling grew louder. Martha and David tried to stop Emily from drawing, but she became hysterical without her crayons. "They get angry if I don't draw them," she screamed. David dismissed it as a phase, though even he couldn't explain the strange occurrences. The footsteps echoing through the house at night, the faint whispers that seemed to come from the walls, and the shadowy figures that flickered in the corners of their vision. Martha, desperate for answers, turned to Emily's teacher, Ms. Reed, for help. "Emily is a gifted artist," Ms. Reed said, "but some of her drawings, they're unsettling. It's as if she's drawing things she's seen. But they're not real," Martha insisted. Ms. Reed hesitated. "Are you sure about that?" One stormy night, Emily drew the Red Man again, this time larger and more detailed. "He says he's coming to see you," Emily told her parents, her voice distant. "Who is coming?" David asked, his patience wearing thin. "The Red Man," she said simply. At midnight, the Carter family was awakened by a loud crash. The framed pictures in the hallway had fallen to the floor, their glass shattered. The air in the house grew icy, and the sound of heavy footsteps echoed down the hall. David grabbed a flashlight and opened Emily's bedroom door. She was sitting on her bed, wide-eyed, clutching her crayons. "He's here," she whispered. The flashlight flickered, and for a split second, David saw him, a tall, crimson figure standing in the corner, his head tilted as though observing them. The flashlight went out, and when David turned it back on, the figure was gone. Martha began researching similar cases and stumbled upon an old article about a boy named Oliver Grant, who had lived in their house decades earlier. Like Emily, Oliver had been a talented artist with a vivid imagination. One day, he mysteriously disappeared, leaving behind a series of disturbing drawings. One of the drawings showed a figure strikingly similar to the Red Man. Desperate, Martha sought the help of a local medium, Agnes Finch, who specialized in supernatural occurrences. "This isn't just a haunting," Agnes said after visiting the house. "Emily's drawings are a doorway. Something from another realm is using her talent to cross over into ours." "Can we stop it?" Martha asked. Agnes nodded grimly. "We have to destroy the drawings, all of them." That night, Agnes, Martha, and David gathered every drawing Emily had ever made. They built a bonfire in the backyard, feeding the flames with pages filled with monstrous creatures and eerie landscapes. As the drawings burned, the house seemed to tremble. Shadows writhed against the walls, and Emily screamed, "You're hurting them! Stop!" The fire roared higher as the final drawing, the most recent depiction of the Red Man, was thrown into the flames. A deafening roar echoed through the air, and then silence. The house felt lighter, as though a dark presence had been lifted. Emily stopped drawing for a while, her crayons tucked away in a box in the attic. When she did return to her art, her drawings were cheerful and bright, filled with sunshine and flowers. But every now and then, Martha would catch Emily staring at an empty corner of the room, her expression distant. "He's still watching," Emily said once, her voice barely above a whisper. Martha shook her head, refusing to believe it. But late at night, when the house was quiet, she would sometimes hear the faint scrape of crayon against paper and wonder. It was a chilly autumn evening when Sarah Monroe, a college sophomore, arrived at the Harper residence. She had been babysitting for years to help pay for tuition, and the Harpers had recently reached out through a local recommendation. They needed someone to watch their 6-year-old daughter, Lucy, for the night while they attended a charity gala. The house was old but charming, with ivy crawling up its brick walls and large bay windows glowing warmly from within. Sarah stepped inside, greeted by the faint smell of lavender and the sound of a ticking grandfather clock in the hallway. Mrs. Harper, an elegant woman in her early 40s, greeted Sarah warmly. "Lucy's been so excited to meet you," she said with a smile. "She's in the playroom upstairs. Dinner is in the fridge if she gets hungry, and she should be in bed by 8:30. Mr. Harper appeared from the study, adjusting his cufflinks. "She can be a bit shy at first," he said, "but she'll warm up to you. Call us if you need anything." With that, the Harpers left, the door closing softly behind them. Sarah climbed the creaky staircase to the second floor, following the sound of soft humming. She found Lucy sitting cross-legged on the floor of the playroom, surrounded by a tea set and a collection of dolls. "Hi, Lucy," Sarah said cheerfully. The little girl looked up, her pale face framed by dark, silky hair. Her large eyes seemed to shimmer in the dim light. "Hi," she said softly. Sarah noticed Lucy's delicate features, an old-fashioned dress, a white frock with lace trim that looked like it belonged in a different era. "Would you like some tea?" Lucy asked, holding up a tiny porcelain cup. "Of course," Sarah replied, sitting down across from her. They played together for a while, and Sarah was struck by how polite and calm Lucy was. Most kids her age were bursting with energy, but Lucy spoke in a whisper and moved with an almost ghostly grace. As the evening wore on, Sarah began to notice peculiar things. While she was tidying up the kitchen, she heard soft giggles echoing down the hallway. When she peeked into the playroom, Lucy was sitting quietly with her dolls. "Were you laughing just now?" Sarah asked. Lucy shook her head. "It was the others." "The others?" Lucy smiled but didn't elaborate. Later, when Sarah checked the upstairs bathroom, she found the mirror fogged up as if someone had taken a hot shower, except the water wasn't running. Scrawled across the glass in a childlike hand were the words, "Play with us." Her heart raced as she wiped the mirror clean, convincing herself it was just Lucy playing a prank. At 8:15, Sarah gently reminded Lucy that it was almost bedtime. The little girl nodded and climbed into bed without protest. "Good night, Lucy," Sarah said, tucking her in. "Good night, Sarah," Lucy replied. Then after a pause, she added, "Don't open the closet." Sarah blinked. "Why not?" Lucy's voice dropped to a whisper. "They don't like it. Trying to brush off the unease, Sarah turned off the light and closed the door. She decided to wait in the living room until the Harpers returned, but her curiosity about the closet gnawed at her. Around 9 o'clock, Sarah couldn't resist any longer. She tiptoed back to Lucy's room and opened the door just enough to peek inside. Lucy was fast asleep, her small chest rising and falling rhythmically. The closet loomed in the corner, its door slightly ajar. Holding her breath, Sarah approached it and pulled the door open. Inside, she found rows of neatly hung dresses and shelves of toys. But what caught her eye was a small, dusty photograph on the top shelf. She reached for it, her fingers trembling. The photo showed a family, a man, a woman, and a little girl. Sarah recognized the girl immediately. It was Lucy, wearing the same white dress she had on tonight. But something about the photo was off. The edges were yellowed, and the date in the corner read 1984. Her stomach dropped. Sarah hurried downstairs and grabbed her phone, intending to call the Harpers. But before she could dial, she heard soft footsteps behind her. She turned to see Lucy standing at the bottom of the staircase, her head tilted. "You weren't supposed to open the closet," Lucy said, her voice devoid of emotion. "Lucy? Who are you?" Sarah stammered. Lucy's lips curled into a faint smile. "I told you, they don't like it when you open the closet." The lights flickered and a cold draft swept through the house. Shadows began to move along the walls, and Sarah heard faint whispers growing louder and louder. Panicking, she backed away, but Lucy stepped closer. "You should have listened," the girl said. At that moment, the front door burst open, and the Harpers rushed in. Mrs. Harper ran to Lucy and scooped her up, holding her tightly. "You opened the closet, didn't you?" Mr. Harper asked, his face pale. I didn't know," Sarah began, but Mrs. Harper cut her off. "She's not supposed to know," Mrs. Harper cried. Through her terror, Sarah demanded answers. Mr. Harper sighed and began to explain. "Lucy was our daughter," he said. "She died in 1984. In this house, but her spirit never left. She's all we have left of her." Tears filled Mrs. Harper's eyes. "She's usually harmless as long as you don't disturb her things. The closet, it's where she hides when she's angry." Sarah stared at the couple in disbelief. "Why didn't you tell me? Would you have agreed to babysit if we had?" Mr. Harper asked grimly. Before Sarah could respond, Lucy spoke up. "I like playing with you, Sarah, but you should go now." The shadows receded and the house grew quiet again. Without another word, Sarah grabbed her bag and left, her heart pounding. She never returned to the Harper house, and she refused to babysit again. But every now and then, when she walked past the old house, she swore she could see Lucy standing in the window, watching and waiting for her next playmate. At the edge of a forgotten forest, hidden behind a veil of mist, stood Belhaven Academy, an imposing Gothic building with towering spires and arched windows that seemed to whisper secrets. Rumors about the school had swirled for centuries. Local villagers claimed they often heard faint laughter and the chiming of a bell that hadn't rung in decades. Yet no one could explain why the surrounding area always felt colder or why shadows lingered even on the brightest days. It was on a chilly autumn evening that Clara Bennett, a 16-year-old with a penchant for adventure, found herself at the gates of Belhaven Academy. Her family had recently moved to the nearby town of Hallowstead, and Belhaven was the only school accepting new students mid-year. Despite her reservations about its eerie reputation, Clara had little choice but to attend. On her first day, Clara was greeted by the headmistress, Miss Eloise Grimshaw, an elegant woman dressed in an outdated Victorian gown. Her sharp features and piercing gray eyes gave Clara the impression that nothing escaped her notice. "Welcome to Belhaven Academy, Miss Bennett," Miss Grimshaw said, her voice calm but firm. "We have a rich history here, and we expect our students to respect it. Follow the rules and you'll fit in just fine." Clara was handed her schedule and directed to her first class. As she navigated the winding hallways, she noticed how everything about the school seemed frozen in time. Gas lamps flickered on the walls, and the scent of aged wood filled the air. When she entered her classroom, every head turned to look at her. The students were dressed in a variety of clothing styles, some in medieval tunics, others in colonial frocks or Edwardian dresses. Clara thought it was odd but assumed it was part of some tradition. The teacher, Mr. Hawthorne, a stern man in a powdered wig, cleared his throat. Miss Bennett, take a seat. Clara found an empty desk near the back and sat down, feeling the weight of the students' gazes. As the weeks passed, Clara began to notice strange things about Belhaven. Her classmates spoke in ways that didn't match the modern world. Eliza, a cheerful girl who sat next to her, often used phrases like methinks and prithee. Another student, Thomas, carried a quill and ink pot, writing on parchment instead of paper. Clara also noticed that no one ever talked about home or family. When she asked Eliza where she lived, the girl looked confused and said, "Here, of course. Where else would I be?" The strangest thing of all was the school bell. Every evening at precisely 6 p.m., it would chime, signaling the end of the day. But when Clara tried to find the bell tower, she discovered that it was boarded up. The stairs leading to it crumbled and impassable. One night, unable to sleep, Clara decided to investigate. She crept through the darkened halls and peered into the classrooms. What she saw made her blood run cold. Her classmates weren't sitting at desks. They were floating, translucent, their forms shimmering like mist in the moonlight. The next morning, Clara confronted Eliza. "What's going on here? I saw you last night. You're not alive, are you?" Eliza hesitated, her cheerful demeanor fading. "You weren't supposed to see that," she said softly, "but I suppose it was only a matter of time before you figured it out." She explained that every student at Belhaven was a ghost, each from a different century. "We're souls who couldn't move on," Eliza said. "Belhaven is our sanctuary, a place where time doesn't matter." Clara's mind raced. "But I'm alive. Why am I here?" Eliza's expression grew somber. "Sometimes the living stumble into our world. The veil between life and death is thin around Belhaven." Clara felt a chill run down her spine. "Can I leave?" "You can," Eliza said, "but only if you leave before the bell tolls on All Hallows Eve. After that, the veil will close, and you'll be one of us." Determined to escape, Clara began searching for a way out. But the school seemed to conspire against her. Doors that were open during the day would lock at night, and the hallways seemed to shift, leading her in circles. She turned to Mr. Hawthorne for help, hoping the teacher might have sympathy for her plight. To her surprise, he revealed that he had once been alive too. "I was a scholar in the 18th century," he said. "I came here seeking knowledge but stayed too long. Now I teach others like me." "Can you help me leave?" Clara pleaded. He sighed. "I can guide you, but the path will be perilous. You must confront the headmistress. She holds the key to the veil." On the night of October 31st, Clara made her way to Ms. Grimshaw's office. The air was thick with tension, and the school seemed alive, its walls groaning as if protesting her defiance. Ms. Grimshaw was waiting for her, standing by the window with the moonlight casting an ethereal glow around her. "You've learned our secret," she said, "and now you wish to leave." "Yes," Clara said firmly. Ms. Grimshaw's eyes narrowed. "Leaving Belhaven is not so simple. The living rarely understand the gift they've been given, a chance to exist beyond time." Clara stepped forward. "I don't belong here. Let me go." The headmistress studied her for a long moment before nodding. "Very well. But know this, the path you take will be fraught with danger. If you fail, you will remain here forever." She handed Clara an antique pocket watch. "This will guide you. Follow its hands to the gate before the final toll of the bell." The watch led Clara through a maze of shifting corridors and spectral apparitions. Shadows clawed at her, whispers filled her ears, and cold fingers brushed against her skin. Finally, she reached the gates of Belhaven, the mist swirling around her. She pushed them open just as the bell began to chime. 1, 2, 3. The sound reverberated through her bones, urging her forward. By the 12th chime, Clara had crossed the threshold. The gates slammed shut behind her, and she collapsed onto the ground, gasping for air. When Clara looked back, Belhaven Academy was gone. In its place was an empty field, overgrown with weeds. She returned to Hallowstead and tried to tell her family what had happened, but they dismissed it as a wild story. However, Clara knew the truth. Every year on October 31st, she would hear the faint toll of a bell in the distance, a reminder of the school where time stood still and the ghosts of centuries past continued their lessons. Hollow Creek was a quaint town nestled deep within a dense forest, cut off from the rest of the world by miles of winding dirt roads and towering trees. Its charm lay in its old-world simplicity: stone cottages, a single cobblestone square, and the ever-present sound of the creek that gave the town its name. But beneath its picturesque exterior lay a dark, unspoken secret. The Order of the Crimson Grove, a cult as old as the town itself, held the reins of power in Hollow Creek. Its existence was whispered about in hushed tones, its name never uttered openly. The townsfolk lived in fear, their lives ruled by an invisible force they dared not challenge. One brisk autumn morning, a young journalist named Clara Ridgewell arrived in Hollow Creek. Clara was known for her investigative reporting and had spent years chasing stories of corruption and cover-ups. She had come to Hollow Creek after receiving an anonymous tip about a series of mysterious disappearances in the area. The locals were wary of her presence. When she tried to ask questions, she was met with polite but curt responses. People avoided eye contact, their faces pale and drawn. Her first break came when she visited the town's lone library. Hidden among dusty records, Clara found references to the Order of the Crimson Grove, an organization that supposedly worshipped an ancient forest spirit. The spirit, known only as the Hollow One, was said to demand blood sacrifices in exchange for protection and prosperity. Clara dug deeper, piecing together the fragmented history. Centuries ago, when Hollow Creek was founded, settlers faced harsh winters, failed crops, and a plague that threatened to wipe them out. Desperate, they turned to an old hermit who lived in the forest. The hermit claimed to have communed with a powerful spirit. "Appease the Hollow One," he told them, "and it will grant you protection and abundance. But the price is steep, a life for a life." Desperation outweighed morality, and the settlers offered their first sacrifice: a young woman chosen by the hermit. When the plague lifted and the crops flourished, the settlers were convinced of the Hollow One's power. Thus began the tradition of sacrifice, passed down through generations. Clara noticed strange happenings during her stay. At night, she saw hooded figures disappearing into the forest, carrying lanterns that flickered like will-o'-the-wisps. The townsfolk would gather in the square on certain nights, murmuring prayers in an ancient tongue. She grew close to Eleanor Marsh, a young woman who worked at the local inn. Eleanor was the only person willing to speak with Clara, though her nervous glances suggested she was risking much by doing so. "Leave while you can," Eleanor warned one night. "You don't understand what you're dealing with." "Then help me understand," Clara urged. Eleanor hesitated before revealing that every year, the Order selected a new member for the sacrifice. The chosen one was taken to the Crimson Grove, a secluded clearing deep in the forest, where their blood was spilled to appease the Hollow One. As Clara's investigation progressed, she began to feel uneasy. The townspeople watched her more closely, their polite smiles replaced with cold stares. She noticed Eleanor growing distant, her initial courage replaced by fear. One evening, Clara returned to her room to find a note slipped under her door. The message was scrawled in shaky handwriting. Her blood ran cold. She packed her belongings and prepared to leave town, but the roads leading out of Hollow Creek were blocked by fallen trees, a suspicious coincidence. On the night of the harvest moon, Clara was taken from her room by force. Hooded figures surrounded her, their faces obscured. Despite her struggles, they carried her deep into the forest. The air grew colder, and the trees seemed to close in around them. They arrived at the Crimson Grove, a circular clearing bathed in eerie red light. In the center stood an ancient altar, its surface stained dark with centuries of blood. The townsfolk gathered around, chanting in unison, their voices blending into a haunting melody. Clara was bound to the altar as the high priest stepped forward. The priest removed his hood, revealing the face of the town's mayor, Edgar Vance. "You've meddled where you don't belong," Edgar said, his voice calm but menacing. "The Hollow One demands a sacrifice, and you have been chosen." As the chanting reached a fever pitch, the ground began to shake. A dark mist rose from the earth, coalescing into a towering figure. The Hollow One was neither man nor beast, its form shifting constantly, horned and shadowed, with glowing eyes that pierced the darkness. The creature loomed over Clara, its presence suffocating. It let out a guttural growl, and the air grew thick with the scent of decay. But Clara wasn't ready to give up. She had managed to loosen the ropes binding her hands. As the high priest raised a ceremonial dagger, she broke free, grabbing a burning torch from one of the villagers. Clara swung the torch at the villagers, scattering them. The Hollow One roared, its form flickering like a dying flame. Clara realized the creature was tied to the grove. If she could destroy the altar, she might sever its connection to the mortal world. With all her strength, she smashed the torch against the altar. The ancient stone cracked, and a blinding light erupted from within. The Hollow One let out a deafening scream as its form began to dissolve. The villagers froze, their chanting silenced. One by one, they fled into the forest, their faith shattered. When Clara awoke, the grove was gone, replaced by an overgrown patch of forest. The altar had crumbled to dust, and the oppressive presence of the Hollow One was no more. She returned to Hollow Creek to find the townspeople in disarray. Without their ancient ritual, they were forced to confront the reality of their actions. Some fled, while others sought redemption. Clara's story made headlines, but she left out the supernatural details, knowing few would believe her. She moved far from Hollow Creek, though the memory of that night haunted her. And in the quiet moments, when the wind whispered through the trees, she swore she could still hear the faint echo of the Hollow One's roar.